I want to make sure everybody has a correct answer key to application exercise 4.2, since this is really the essential problem to analyze monopolies. And the probability of your getting a question in this ballpark in the exam, and maybe again in the final, is essentially 100%. So let's begin. So here's the problem. You've seen it before. I'll pause just so you can remind yourself. We've got this potentially competitive market. That's an important detail that tries to cartelize, tries to act together, organize all these producers to together achieve the monopoly outcome. That's the situation here. We've got the competitive market situation, market clearing at $6 per sack. What's going to happen if they are successful? Let's analyze that case, the effect on efficiency as well as on price and quantity sold. Let's think about that cartel as students in section 1, team 7, good job, indicated. This is a nice segue to our study of game theory in the next class period. And then, we talked about it in class in both sections. All right, let's get started. This page, we were asked to show the price and quantity along with the deadweight loss, and then we're going to address this question of likelihood to. So here's the potato market. I'm going to try to I don't know that let's see if I can get a straight line down. Yeah, not bad. So now I've got to undo that so I can do that again. The key to analyzing a monopoly problem is to derive the marginal revenue curve from the demand curve. That's the big thing with a monopolist. Competitive firms are price takers. The marginal revenue is just the market price. The logic of firm behavior for a monopolist is quite similar to the logic. It's exactly the same as the logic for firm behavior in the presence of monopoly. What changes is the marginal revenue function. So, I'll always give you a linear demand curve, and in large part because the marginal revenue curve for a monopolist facing a linear demand curve is so easy to identify. So let's do that. I've recently learned how to do this. I'm going to try to do this in blue. Let's see. Okay, so here we've got this monopolist. The marginal revenue curve is a straight line that has the same y-intercept, and I've missed it. I should map that out a little bit more carefully. It has the same y-intercept as the market demand curve and is twice as steep, so the x-axis intercept is going to be half the distance between the origin and the x-intercept of the demand curve. So let's see if I'm going to try one more time to do this neatly and sharply, and we'll see if I get there. This is in theory going to turn into a straight line. Oh, it did. So now I'm going to try to manage this line. There we go. So I can move it around and then stretch it to where I need it to go. Perfect. All right, that's what I was trying to do. It worked. Yay. All right, so that's our marginal revenue curve. And of course, we don't have an equation, so it's going to be hard to be super precise. But we can see that the point where marginal revenue is just equal to marginal cost is going to be right there. That gets us the monopoly quantity. From there, we go up, read the monopoly price off the demand curve, and then we analyze our deadweight loss. Now, I should do a little bit of labeling here. First let's note that this graph was for the competitive industry, and for a competitive industry, we have a supply curve, but for a monopoly, we don't. So what instead, we remember that the competitive industry supply curve comes from that industry's marginal cost curve. So if we're analyzing an industry that could be competitive, we just take the market supply curve. That would be the monopolized industry, the cartelized industry marginal cost curve. So that's one thing. But then we also need to label this curve that we just identified. Let's see if I can change the color to match. There we go. Marginal revenue. All right, so we've got our labels. And then let's go back to that drawing tool. And I'll use green to identify, I think that's a better tool, to identify the quantity. Again, I'm going to just make the line and then futz with it a little bit to get it to look right. I don't have a shift key on my iPad, so I can't, well, there's probably a way to do it, but I don't know the way to make sure this is vertical. As you know, it's supposed to be vertical. That's pretty close. And then I'll do that again. Or I'm thinking I'm doing that again. I don't know. Not totally sure what's going on with my drawing tool. I'm losing. Oh, there it is. All right. So I think I've got it now. Same color. I'm going to now select that. This is probably not best practices to learn about what your iPad can do right in the middle of making a screencast. All right, there we've got it. So we've got a market quantity of, say, 215, 220, say, million sacks per year, price, roughly $17 per 100-pound sack. And notice that's a big increase from our $6 price per sack. And then we should probably indicate deadweight loss. That's part of the drill. I'm just going to scribble deadweight loss in red. The deadweight loss is all the surplus that was not realized in the monopoly case, but was realized in the competitive market case. So that's the deadweight loss. Let's label that. Deadweight loss. All right. What else were we asked to do? I'm going to jump back to our pre-seed. First, I want to point something out, and I'm going to do it with just my pointer. So we see that this monopoly outcome is really inefficient in the sense that there's a big deadweight loss. But I want to also show you that even though there's a large measure of surplus that is actually realized in the monopoly case, it represents an equity effect of monopoly. Notice that this square that I'm outlining here, this rectangle, I should say, it's surplus that's realized in both the competitive and the monopoly cases. But in the competitive case, this rectangle is part of consumer surplus, and it's a big share of the consumer surplus enjoyed by potato consumers in a competitive outcome. But in a monopolized or a cartelized outcome, this rectangle change of surplus is still realized, but instead of accruing to consumers, it accrues to producers. So there's an efficiency loss here, so the monopoly outcome is inefficient. There's also a big transfer of resources from consumers to producers, and so there's a bigger equity effect that you should point out. And I guess the one thing to close with, and this is going to be a real important part of any essay question. Here we have a potato market that could be competitive, and so seeing a cartel emerge in that market would represent a huge efficiency loss and a new a worsening of fairness of outcomes in the economy. If we were analyzing some drug market for some new cure for some terrible disease, analyzing the monopoly outcome, we could point out this inefficiency and this equity effect, but our conclusion would be very different in that if there is a new product that only exists because its development was inspired by a patent, then talking about the monopolized outcome in when the drug comes to be developed and to be found to be useful and tested and brought to market, criticizing that outcome for being inefficient, well, it's not as important a criticism as it is, say, in the potato market that could have been served by a competitive industry. If it's a product that only exists because of the patent protection, because of the monopoly status of the producer in that industry, well, then to criticize that outcome as being inefficient, well, nobody would have had it without the monopoly case. So is that really is there really harm being done there if the product wouldn't have existed without the monopoly protection, the patent protected monopoly rights? It's a harder case to make. So that's important to point out. Let's talk a bit then about the stability of the cartel. There's no graph here, but a lot of teams predicted cartel stability because, what are people going to do if they like potatoes? They got to buy them from a potato producer. Well, there's a cartel will succeed. But that's not the point at which cartels fail. Cartels fail, and they fail the vast majority of the time anybody tried this, including in the potato market cartel. It was tried in the early 2000s. The problem is if the cartel succeeds in raising the price of a potato, every one of the zillion potato producers, how many thousands of potato producers would there be in the U.S.? Many, many thousands, I suspect. Anyway, every one of them looks at that high price and says, whoa, I'm just one in thousands. If I just produce a little more output, I'm going to knock the price down a teeny tiny bit, but I'll have a lot more profit. So I'm going to produce a little bit more. This is called chiseling. And especially in a market with a lot of producers where it's really hard to go to farm, 5,672, said, you guys cheated on your output. Everybody, it's just really hard to monitor. And anyway, so everybody has this incentive to produce a little bit more to get a little more profit. And boom, lo and behold, pretty soon you're producing the competitive quantity as everybody chisels. So cartels break down because of the incentive that a successful cartel creates for each individual member to produce a little bit extra. And since everybody's facing that incentive and everybody is chiseling, the cartel breaks down. And so the likelihood of success of this cartel is very close to zero. And indeed, it failed very early in its existence, as most such efforts in history have done. I think that's the end of the key points off this wrap-up.